Imagine standing on the edge of a frozen cliff face in what is now southern France, looking out over a tundra that stretches endlessly into the gray horizon, and realizing that the figure walking toward you through the driving snow, a figure draped in furs, carrying a heavy thrusting spear, with a brow ridged like a shelf of bone over deep, soulful eyes, is human, undeniably human, and yet entirely distinct from you. A creature that is not an ancestor, but a brother. A separate experiment in consciousness that has walked the earth for hundreds of thousands of years before your kind ever left the cradle of Africa. We live in a world of profound loneliness, a singular biological anomaly where we are the only creatures of our kind, the sole survivors of a diverse and chaotic family tree. And because of this solitude, we have lulled ourselves into the false belief that human evolution was a straight line, a ladder climbing from the hunched ape to the upright conqueror. But the fossil record screams a different truth, a truth that is messier, bloodier, and far more tragic, revealing that for the vast majority of our time on this planet, we were not alone, but rather we shared this globe with a cast of characters so varied and strange that they defy our modern imagination. A time when the world was a version of Middle-earth without the magic, but with all the danger, populated by giants and dwarves, by forest dwellers and tundra walkers, all of whom possessed fire, tools, and perhaps even names for the stars. To understand who we are, we must go back to the moment we stepped out of Africa, around 60 or 70,000 years ago, and realize the neighborhood was already full. For when Homo sapiens began that great migration, we were the new kids on the block, moving into territories held by species that had adapted to their environments with a biological precision we lacked. And the first and most formidable of these were the Neanderthals, the kings of the Ice Age, who had mastered the cold of Europe and the Levant for nearly 500,000 years. It is a cinematic injustice that for decades we painted them as knuckle-dragging brutes, grunting in the dark, because the archaeological reality is hauntingly different. They were shorter than us, but possessed a terrifying muscular density, built like powerlifters, with chests like barrels to warm the freezing air. And they were survivors who hunted mammoths and woolly rhinos in close-quarter combat, suffering bone breaks comparable to modern rodeo riders. Yet they were also gentle, for we find skeletons of their elderly and disabled who were cared for, chew food for the toothless, and flowers buried with their dead in the Shanidar cave, suggesting that they sat by the fire and pondered the nature of mortality just as we do. Imagine the first meeting, a band of tall, slender, dark-skinned sapiens encountering a group of pale, stocky, red-haired Neanderthals in a valley in the Levant, the tension thick as smoke, the mutual recognition of intelligence in the other's eyes, a moment that could have resulted in war or trade, but which genetics tells us resulted in intimacy. For we now know that we did not just fight them, we made love to them. We brought them into our caves, and they brought us into theirs, blending our lineages so deeply that today, billions of people walking the earth carry the DNA of these lost siblings in their blood, a ghost code that influences our immune systems and our skin, proving that while their bodies vanished, their essence survived within us. But the Neanderthals were not the only ones, for if you traveled east during that same epoch, crossing the vast steppes of Central Asia, you would enter the domain of a ghost species we barely know, the Denisovans, a group so elusive that we have no complete skull, no full skeleton, only a few teeth, a finger bone, and a jaw found in a cave in Tibet. Yet from these fragments, we have extracted a genetic empire, revealing that they were likely the giants of the East, adapted to high altitudes, possessing a gene that allowed them to breathe thin air, a gift they passed on to the modern Tibetans, and just like the Neanderthals, they were not simple beasts. For in the Denisova cave in Siberia, barely distinguishable layers of dirt yielded a polished bracelet of green stone, drilled with a precision that suggests high-speed rotation tools, a level of sophistication that shocks us, implying that while we were painting caves in France, the Denisovans were crafting jewelry in the Altai Mountains, ruling a territory that stretched down to Southeast Asia. And the story gets stranger, more fantastical, when we leave the continents and venture into the islands of Indonesia, specifically the island of Flores, a lost world cut off from the mainland by deep ocean trenches, where evolution went mad in isolation, turning elephants into pygmies and humans into something out of a Tolkien novel. the species Homo floresiensis, affectionately known as the hobbits. These were full-grown adults standing only 3.5 feet tall, with brains the size of a chimpanzee's, yet capable of crafting stone tools and hunting the giant Komodo dragons that shared their island. A testament to the fact that you do not need a big brain to be clever. You only need a brain wired for survival, and they lived there for hundreds of thousands of years, enduring volcanic eruptions and limited resources. A miniature kingdom of humanity thriving in a jungle pocket universe until shockingly recently, perhaps as late as 50,000 years ago, meaning they could have smelled the smoke of our ancestors' fires across the water. Further north, in the Philippines, yet another cousin, Homo luzonensis, climbed the trees with curved fingers and toes, a mosaic of ancient and modern traits surviving in the canopy, reminding us that the human blueprint was not rigid but incredibly plastic, capable of shifting and warping to fit the demands of the jungle. And then there is the mystery of the Rising Star Cave System in South Africa, where the deep, dark, terrifyingly narrow chutes hid the remains of Homo naledi, a species with an orange-sized brain that somehow navigated pitch-black tunnels to dispose of their dead. A ritualistic behavior we thought was exclusive to big-brained humans, challenging every assumption we ever had about what it means to be complex. So, the question that haunts us, the question that should keep us awake at night, is not how we evolved, but why we are the only ones left. Why the tree was pruned so violently that only one branch remains. Was it a genocide? Did we, with our superior projectile weapons and our unparalleled capacity for organized violence, systematically slaughter our cousins, driving the Neanderthals to the cliffs of Gibraltar and the Denisovans into the oblivion of history? Or was it something more subtle? A slow competitive exclusion where we simply outate, outbred, and outlived them, our larger social networks allowing us to absorb setbacks that shattered their smaller, more isolated tribes. There is evidence of violence, of skulls crushed and bones bearing cut marks, but there is also the evidence of absorption, of the fact that we loved them enough to have children with them, suggesting that perhaps we didn't wipe them out with swords, but with numbers, swamping their populations until they simply dissolved into ours. A biological assimilation, where the distinct lines of the Neanderthal and the Denisovan blurred and vanished into the rising tide of Homo sapiens. The tragedy of their loss is immeasurable, for with every species that blinked out, we lost a unique way of seeing the world, a unique language of thought, a unique solution to the problem of being alive. And we are left now in a silent echo chamber, shouting into the void and hearing only our own voices return, mistakenly thinking this silence is normal, when in reality, it is a recent and terrible aberration. We are the lonely survivors of a crowded family, walking through a museum of ghosts, and when we look into the mirror, if we look closely enough past the shape of our own chins and the color of our own eyes, we can see them looking back at us. The heavy brow of the Neanderthal, the high-altitude lungs of the Denisovan, the endurance of the walker, the spark of the firemaker, all of them living on inside the very architecture of our being, reminding us that we are not a single pure thing, but a mosaic of all the humans we met and loved and destroyed along the way. And that is the true, epic, and devastating history of our species.